There will come a moment in your life when everything you counted on seems to fall apart at once. Plans fail, support disappears, confidence shakes, and the voice in your head starts asking a dangerous question: what if this is the end? Most people stop right there. They let fear decide the story and walk away before discovering what they are truly made of. But this message is not for most people. This is for those who refuse to quit simply because the road became uncomfortable. What if the moment you feel most broken is actually the moment your real strength is born? What if fear only appears when you are standing at the edge of a breakthrough? Stay with this message, because what you are about to hear is not motivation for easy times. It is a blueprint for becoming fearless when nothing seems to be working, when doubt is loud, and when quitting feels justified. By the end of this video, you will understand why fear shows up at your lowest point, how to take back control when everything else fails, and how to rise with a mindset that cannot be defeated. Fear is not created by events themselves, but by the uncertainty the mind attaches to those events. Reality simply exists as it is, neutral and unmoved. But the human mind seeks meaning, prediction, and control, and when it cannot clearly see what comes next, it fills the gap with imagined danger. Uncertainty gives fear its power because the unknown allows the mind to exaggerate consequences, magnify risks, and invent outcomes that may never occur. A person standing before a closed door does not fear the door, they fear what might be behind it. This distinction is critical because it reveals that fear is a mental construction rather than an external force. When individuals mistake uncertainty for reality, they begin reacting to possibilities instead of facts, draining energy on worries rather than solutions. The mind, left undisciplined, treats the unknown as a threat to survival, even when no immediate danger exists. This is why fear intensifies during moments of transition, failure, or change, not because the situation is inherently harmful, but because clarity is temporarily absent. As certainty decreases, imagination becomes louder, and fear grows in proportion to the stories the mind tells itself. Those who understand this principle learn to separate what is from what might be, regaining control over their emotional state. By focusing on present facts rather than future assumptions, fear begins to weaken, as it can only survive where confusion dominates. Clarity, even partial clarity, disrupts fear's influence by grounding the mind in reality instead of speculation. When uncertainty is met with deliberate thought, purposeful action, and patience, fear loses its authority because it no longer has an empty space to occupy. The realization that fear is not a response to reality, but to the absence of understanding, empowers individuals to face challenges without emotional paralysis, transforming moments of doubt into opportunities for conscious decision-making, rather than instinctive retreat. Defeat has no permanent power of its own. It only becomes final when the mind agrees to accept it as such. Circumstances may delay progress, interrupt plans, or even dismantle what has already been built, but none of these conditions possess the authority to define the outcome of a life. The moment a person labels a setback as the end, they surrender control of their future to a single moment in time. This acceptance transforms a temporary experience into a lasting identity, allowing one failure to speak for all future possibilities. Many people do not quit because they are incapable, but because they mentally conclude that further effort is useless, and this conclusion freezes potential in place. Defeat is often nothing more than feedback revealing that a different approach, stronger preparation, or greater patience is required. When the mind remains open, defeat functions as instruction, rather than condemnation. The difference between those who rise and those who remain stuck lies not in talent or luck, but in interpretation. A setback interpreted as a lesson strengthens resolve, while the same setback interpreted as finality weakens ambition. History repeatedly shows that the greatest achievements are often built on repeated disappointments that refuse to be accepted as permanent. Persistence rewrites the meaning of defeat by refusing to let a single outcome dictate the final story. As long as action continues, defeat remains incomplete and powerless. The mind that refuses to surrender maintains creative energy, adaptability, and hope, even under pressure. By choosing to see defeat as temporary, individuals protect their confidence and preserve momentum. ensuring that setbacks remain events rather than verdicts. The refusal to accept defeat as final is not denial of reality, but a disciplined commitment to growth, learning, and forward movement despite present circumstances. A clear purpose acts as an inner anchor when external stability disappears, providing direction at the very moment confusion tries to take control. Without purpose, the mind becomes reactive, easily influenced by fear, doubt, and the opinions of others because it has no fixed point to return to when circumstances shift. Purpose organizes thought, channels energy, and gives meaning to struggle, allowing a person to endure pressure without losing identity. When challenges arise, the absence of a clear aim magnifies fear, as the mind begins to question whether the effort is worthwhile or the pain has value. In contrast, a defined purpose transforms hardship into a necessary stage of progress rather than a sign of failure. It creates emotional resilience by answering the internal question of why continue before doubt has a chance to take hold. Purpose does not eliminate obstacles, but it reduces their psychological weight by placing them within a larger framework of intention. Individuals driven by a strong aim are less likely to be derailed by temporary losses because their focus extends beyond immediate discomfort. This long-range vision steadies decision-making and prevents emotional reactions that often lead to fear-based choices. Purpose also strengthens discipline, as actions become aligned with a meaningful objective rather than momentary motivation. When motivation fades, purpose remains, guiding behavior through consistency rather than emotion. The mind draws confidence from this alignment, as clarity replaces uncertainty and direction replaces confusion. Even in isolation or apparent failure, purpose sustains momentum by reminding the individual that progress is not always visible in the moment. The clearer the purpose, the less room fear has to dominate attention because the mind is occupied with intention instead of speculation. In this way, purpose becomes the foundation of fearlessness, not by removing uncertainty from life, but by giving the mind a reason to move forward despite it. Self-belief is the internal force that determines whether a person rises above circumstances or is controlled by them, and its strength must exceed the pressure applied by the external world. Life constantly presents evidence designed to challenge confidence, including rejection, criticism, failure, and delay, and without a solid belief in one's own capacity, these experiences easily become sources of fear and retreat. External conditions are temporary and often misleading, yet many allow them to define their self-image, forgetting that circumstances reflect moments, not potential. When self-belief is weak, the mind seeks validation from outside sources, making confidence dependent on approval, results, or stability. This dependence creates vulnerability, as fear increases whenever external support fades. Strong self-belief, however, is rooted in decision rather than evidence. It is formed when an individual chooses to trust their ability to learn, adapt, and endure regardless of current outcomes. This belief does not deny reality, but refuses to let reality dictate personal worth or future capability. When belief is internally anchored, challenges become tests of endurance instead of confirmations of inadequacy. The mind begins to interpret difficulty as a signal to grow stronger rather than a reason to withdraw. Fear loses authority when self-belief asserts control over interpretation, because doubt thrives only where confidence is absent. Each deliberate action taken in spite of uncertainty reinforces belief, creating a cycle where courage strengthens confidence and confidence weakens fear. Over time, this inner assurance becomes more powerful than external chaos, allowing steady progress even when results are delayed or invisible. The individual no longer waits for perfect conditions to feel capable, but acts from the conviction that capability is developed through action. When self-belief outweighs circumstances, fear no longer dictates behavior, and the mind remains focused on possibility rather than limitation. Failure is often misunderstood because it is judged by emotion rather than examined for instruction, causing many to experience it as loss instead of guidance. When an effort does not produce the desired outcome, the mind naturally focuses on disappointment, embarrassment, or wasted time, yet beneath these reactions lies valuable information that cannot be gained through success alone. Failure exposes weaknesses in strategy, gaps in knowledge, flaws in timing, and limits of preparation, all of which remain hidden when results come easily. Those who view failure only as loss tend to avoid risk, repeating familiar patterns to protect their self-image, which ultimately restricts growth. In contrast, those who recognize failure as a form of feedback treat each setback as a diagnostic tool rather than a verdict on their ability. This shift in perception transforms emotional pain into practical insight, allowing mistakes to become stepping stones rather than stopping points. Fear diminishes when failure is redefined because the mind no longer associates effort with permanent damage. Instead of asking, "What did this cost me?" the disciplined thinker asks, "What did this teach me?" Every failure carries a lesson proportional to the effort invested, offering clarity about what does not work and guiding future decisions with greater precision. Progress depends not on avoiding failure, but on extracting its meaning and applying it with intelligence. When failure is studied instead of resisted, it sharpens judgment and strengthens resilience, creating an advantage unavailable to those who quit at the first sign of loss. The emotional sting of failure fades as understanding increases, replaced by confidence, built on experience rather than theory. Growth accelerates when the mind accepts that loss is not the opposite of success, but a necessary part of its development, allowing effort to continue without the weight of fear-driven hesitation. Persistence is the force that converts fear from an obstacle into a source of strength because it denies fear the time and space needed to grow. Fear thrives in hesitation, where the mind pauses long enough to imagine consequences without taking action. When effort stops, doubt gains momentum, and uncertainty begins to dominate thought. Persistence interrupts this process by keeping the individual in motion. Even when confidence is low or results are delayed, each continued effort sends a signal to the mind that progress is still possible, weakening the authority of fear. Rather than waiting for motivation to return, persistence relies on disciplined action, proving that courage is developed through movement, not emotion. Over time, repeated action builds familiarity, and what once seemed intimidating becomes manageable through exposure and experience. Persistence also reshapes identity as the individual begins to see themselves as someone who continues despite resistance, rather than someone who retreats under pressure. This shift in self-perception is critical because fear often arises from uncertainty about one's own endurance. By persisting, the individual answers that uncertainty with evidence of resilience. Obstacles that once felt overwhelming lose their intensity when faced repeatedly as the mind adapts to difficulty and gains confidence through survival. Persistence does not eliminate struggle, but it reduces its psychological impact by proving that discomfort can be endured without collapse. Each step forward reinforces the belief that progress is still unfolding, even when outcomes are not yet visible. Fear weakens as persistence strengthens because fear depends on the assumption that pain will be unbearable or effort will be pointless. When persistence proves otherwise, fear loses credibility, and action continues with greater stability and inner control. In the end, fear is revealed not as a permanent enemy, but as a test of awareness, belief, and persistence. When uncertainty arises, it challenges the mind to seek clarity instead of surrender. When defeat appears, it asks whether you will accept a moment as a final verdict or treat it as instruction. Purpose becomes the steady force that gives meaning to struggle, while self-belief determines whether circumstances shape you or you shape your response to them. Failure, when understood, sharpens wisdom rather than diminishing worth, and persistence transforms every obstacle into proof of inner strength. Fear loses its dominance when the mind learns to interpret experiences with discipline rather than emotion, and when action continues despite doubt. In that state, fear no longer controls direction. It becomes a signal that growth is taking place and that progress is being demanded at a higher level. I wish you the courage to trust yourself when the path is unclear, the strength to continue when results are delayed, and the discipline to persist when fear tries to speak the loudest. May every challenge refine your purpose and every setback strengthen your resolve. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your willingness to grow.